Your soulmate is in tears. They would die before admitting the truth that, compared to the third party, you are. Something shifted in a single quiet moment, and no one in the room understood why your soulmate suddenly looked away, blinking back tears they refused to explain. It wasn't the conversation that broke them. It wasn't the silence either. It was one simple comparison that slipped into their mind without warning, and once it arrived, they couldn't escape it. For days they had convinced themselves that choosing the easier path would protect everyone involved. Yet now, standing in front of someone who seemed to offer comfort without depth, they realized a painful truth they had buried beneath excuses. Stay with this for a moment, because the next choice they make begins with something they still cannot say out loud. The afternoon felt strangely ordinary. Cars rolled past. Coffee cooled on a nearby table. People laughed without noticing the storm hidden behind one quiet face. The third person sitting across from them smiled, said all the right things, and checked every practical box. Life looked simple there. Predictable. Safe. But your soulmate's eyes kept drifting somewhere else, not toward a place, but toward a memory. They remembered conversations that lasted until sunrise. They remembered being challenged instead of merely comforted. They remembered feeling completely understood without needing to explain themselves. Suddenly, the comparison became impossible to ignore. It wasn't about who looked better, who spoke better, or who seemed more impressive. It was something far deeper. One connection felt convenient. The other felt unforgettable. And that realization frightened them because admitting it would mean admitting they had been running from the truth instead of facing it. Just when they thought they could hide those emotions one more day, an unexpected message appeared, forcing them to question every decision they had made. That message wasn't dramatic. It carried no grand confession or emotional speech. In fact, it barely contained a few honest words. But sometimes the smallest sentence carries the greatest weight. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. Then a third time. Their expression changed with every passing second until the confidence they had been pretending to carry quietly disappeared. There was one detail inside those words that no one else could have recognized, a tiny reminder of a shared moment almost forgotten by everyone except the two people who lived it. In that instant, they finally understood why every attempt to replace what they truly felt had left an emptiness they could never explain. Compared to the third party, you had never simply occupied a place in their life, you had transformed the way they saw themselves. That realization was both beautiful and heartbreaking because admitting it would require admitting they had mistaken certainty for comfort and comfort for love. They lowered their head, wiped away tears before anyone could notice, and whispered something so quietly that even they barely heard it. I've been comparing everything to someone I never truly left behind. But before they could gather the courage to act on that realization, another unexpected encounter was already moving toward them, one that would force the hidden truth into the open far sooner than they ever imagined. The next morning unfolded with an unusual sense of anticipation, as though the world itself knew a turning point had quietly arrived. Your soulmate tried to distract themselves with work, conversations, and ordinary routines, but every attempt only brought your memory back with greater clarity. A familiar song played in the background. A stranger laughed in a way that reminded them of an old conversation. Even the sunlight falling across the window felt strangely familiar, pulling them into moments they thought they had buried forever. Then something happened they never expected. The third party noticed the distance in their eyes and gently asked, "Are you really here with me?" That simple question froze everything. Your soulmate opened their mouth, searching for an answer that would protect everyone's feelings, yet no honest words came out. Silence became the loudest confession of all. For the first time, they realized they had spent so much energy pretending to move forward that they had never truly looked at what their heart had been doing behind the scenes. If you've ever wondered whether someone can recognize the truth after trying so hard to ignore it, keep watching, because the next few moments reveal something they never imagined they would admit, even to themselves. And if this story is touching something inside your heart, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments and subscribing so you don't miss what unfolds next. A quiet walk later that evening changed everything again. Your soulmate wandered through streets they had traveled countless times before, yet every familiar corner seemed to carry a forgotten memory connected to you. They remembered the way you noticed little details other people overlooked. They remembered how you challenged them to become braver instead of simply making life easier. Suddenly, they understood the comparison they had been avoiding all along. It was never about choosing between two people based on appearances, popularity, or convenience. Compared to the third party, you had inspired a version of them that felt authentic, confident, and deeply alive. Around you, they had never needed to perform. They could laugh without thinking, dream without fear, and speak without carefully measuring every sentence. That realization landed with overwhelming force. Their eyes filled again, not because of regret alone, but because they finally saw how often they had mistaken temporary comfort for lasting connection. They whispered to themselves that the hardest truth isn't realizing who matters most. The hardest truth is realizing it after convincing yourself to walk in another direction. Yet one unanswered question still lingered in the air. If this understanding arrived now, was it already too late, or had destiny quietly been preparing another opportunity all along? Before the night ended, your soulmate found themselves standing in front of something they hadn't looked at in a very long time, a small collection of memories they had hidden away because they believed distance would erase their emotions. Instead, every memory carried the same unmistakable message. They smiled differently when you were around. Their confidence sounded different in old conversations. Even their dreams for the future reflected a hope they hadn't felt in months. They slowly sat down, covering their face as fresh tears slipped through their fingers, not dramatic tears, but the quiet kind that arrive when someone finally stops arguing with their own heart. Then they spoke words no one else was there to hear. I kept searching for someone who could replace what I already had, but every comparison led me back to the same person. The room fell completely still after that confession, almost as though time itself paused to let those words settle. Yet before they could decide what to do next, their phone suddenly lit up with an unexpected notification. It wasn't from the third party. It wasn't from a friend. It was something that instantly changed the expression on their face, leaving them completely speechless, and what they discovered in the next moment would force a decision they could no longer postpone. No one could have predicted what that notification would awaken inside them. For a long moment, your soulmate simply stared at the glowing screen without touching it, as if they already knew that opening it would erase every excuse they had been hiding behind. The room felt unusually quiet. Even the ticking clock seemed louder than before. Finally, they took a slow breath and unlocked the phone. It wasn't a dramatic declaration or an emotional plea. It was a simple reminder connected to a date they had almost forgotten, a moment from the past that instantly transported them back to a day when life felt lighter, conversations flowed effortlessly, and hope seemed limitless. Their expression softened. A small smile appeared, followed almost immediately by tears they could no longer hold back. They realized something that had been invisible for far too long: the happiest memories in their life had never been built on perfection. They had been built on authenticity. Compared to the third party, you had never tried to become the person they wanted to see. You had simply been yourself, and somehow that honesty became the safest place their heart had ever known. Stay close, because one unexpected encounter is about to prove that this realization is far more powerful than they imagined. Later that afternoon, fate seemed to arrange a quiet lesson they could not ignore. While waiting in line at a neighborhood cafe, your soulmate overheard two strangers talking about relationships. One of them laughed and said, "The right person doesn't compete with anyone, they simply make you feel more like yourself." Those words landed with astonishing force. It felt as though the entire conversation had been placed there just for them. They walked outside carrying their coffee but forgot to take a single sip. Instead, they found themselves watching people pass by, wondering how many others had mistaken convenience for connection. Their thoughts kept circling back to you. Compared to the third party, you had never encouraged them to hide their imperfections or pretend to have everything figured out. You challenged them to grow without making them feel inadequate. You celebrated small victories that everyone else overlooked. You listened to silences as carefully as spoken words. Suddenly, every comparison that once confused them became crystal clear. The truth they had been afraid to admit was no longer painful because it finally made sense. What frightened them now wasn't the truth itself, it was the possibility that they had waited too long to honor it. Yet just when they thought they understood everything, someone approached them with a question that changed the atmosphere in an instant. The person smiled gently and asked, "If you had one chance to speak honestly to the one person who changed your life, what would you say?" Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Their eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the evening sky slowly shifted into shades of gold and blue. They imagined every conversation they had postponed, every feeling they had disguised as uncertainty, every opportunity they believed would somehow wait forever. Then, almost in a whisper, they answered, would tell them they were never competing with anyone. The comparison ended the moment I stopped lying to myself. As soon as those words left their lips, an incredible sense of peace settled over them, replacing months of inner conflict. But peace was only the beginning. Because just as they turned to leave, their phone vibrated once more. This time it wasn't a memory, a reminder, or a coincidence. It was a message carrying information they had never expected to receive, a message that would give them one unexpected opportunity to rewrite everything before the story reached its most unforgettable turning point. The message stayed unopened for several long seconds, almost as if your soulmate feared that reading it would make everything irreversible. The evening breeze brushed past, people continued walking without a second glance, and yet it felt as though the entire world had paused for this single moment. When they finally tapped the screen, they discovered an unexpected invitation connected to a place that held countless memories neither of you had spoken about in a long time. No one had planned it. No one had arranged it. But somehow every road seemed to be leading back toward the same destination. They whispered to themselves, "Maybe life isn't asking me to forget, maybe it's asking me to finally understand." That realization carried more weight than any dramatic confession ever could. Compared to the third party, you had never represented an easy choice. You represented the version of life that required honesty, courage, and emotional maturity. And for the first time, your soulmate stopped asking which path felt comfortable and started asking which path felt true. Before the next scene unfolds, if this story has reminded you that genuine connections deserve honesty, consider sharing it with someone who believes in meaningful love. Leave your thoughts below, and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. As the invitation drew closer, something remarkable began happening inside your soulmate. The fear that had controlled every decision slowly gave way to quiet determination. They no longer cared about appearances or about proving anyone wrong. Instead, they replayed dozens of moments that now carried completely different meanings. They remembered every time you believed in them before they believed in themselves. They remembered conversations that seemed ordinary then but now felt priceless. They remembered how naturally laughter arrived whenever you were together, without effort or performance. Standing beside the third party had always felt peaceful on the surface, but standing beside you had made them feel completely alive. That difference could no longer be ignored. The comparison they had avoided for so long had reached its final conclusion, not because one person lost, but because the truth finally found its voice. As they looked into the distance, a gentle smile replaced the sadness that had followed them for weeks. Yet there was still one unanswered question echoing through their heart: would they have the courage to say these words directly to you if the opportunity finally arrived? Just before the night came to an end, your soulmate reached the place mentioned in the invitation. The surroundings were quiet, illuminated by soft lights that made every familiar corner seem almost timeless. Their heartbeat quickened with every step. They weren't afraid of rejection anymore. They were afraid of leaving another truth unspoken. Then they noticed something unexpected waiting ahead. Not a dramatic surprise, but a small sign that instantly reminded them how deeply your lives had once been connected. They stopped walking, closed their eyes for a brief moment, and smiled through tears that no longer came from regret but from clarity. The answer was never hidden, they whispered. I was the one refusing to see it. At that exact moment, footsteps echoed from just beyond the corner. Someone was approaching, carrying information that neither of you expected to hear. And within the next few moments, the silence that had separated two hearts for so long was finally about to be broken in the most unforgettable way. The footsteps grew louder with every passing second, yet your soulmate couldn't bring themselves to turn around immediately. Their heart was racing with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief, as though they instinctively knew that whatever happened next would divide their life into two chapters. Everything before this moment, and everything after it. When they finally looked back, they didn't see a dramatic entrance or an emotional scene from a movie. Instead, they saw someone carrying a small envelope and a warm, understanding smile. I was asked to give this to you, the stranger said before quietly walking away. Confused, your soulmate opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note containing only a few simple lines, yet every word seemed to speak directly to the part of their heart they had tried to silence. The note reminded them that real connections are never measured by convenience, they're measured by how deeply two people inspire each other to become their truest selves. In that instant, everything became unmistakably clear. Compared to the third party, you had never simply shared moments with them. You had changed the way they believed in love, trust, and even in their own future. That realization wasn't painful anymore. It felt liberating. Before this story reaches its final turning point, stay with it just a little longer, because the next decision your soulmate makes is the one they've been avoiding from the very beginning. They slowly folded the note and slipped it into their pocket, but something inside them had already transformed forever. The uncertainty that once clouded every thought had disappeared, replaced by a calm confidence they hadn't experienced in a very long time. As they walked through the quiet streets, they noticed details they had overlooked for months: the glow of storefront lights, families laughing together, music drifting through the evening air, and couples walking side by side without saying a word because they didn't need to. Every scene seemed to whisper the same lesson. The strongest relationships are built not on perfection, but on authenticity. They finally admitted what had always been true. The third party had offered certainty without depth, while you had offered growth, honesty, and a connection that continued to live inside every meaningful memory. For so long they had believed moving away from those feelings would make life easier, but all it had done was make life feel incomplete. Now, instead of asking whether they deserved another chance, they began asking whether they were finally ready to become the person who could truly appreciate what they almost lost. The answer arrived without hesitation. For the first time in months, they smiled without forcing it. As midnight quietly approached, your soulmate stopped beneath a sky filled with countless stars and reached for their phone one more time. They stared at your name for several long moments, their thumb hovering over the screen while 100 different emotions passed through their mind. Fear was still there, but it no longer controlled them. Hope had finally become stronger. They whispered softly, "No more comparisons. No more pretending. No more running." Then they pressed the button that would begin a conversation they had imagined 1,000 times but never believed they would actually have. The call had barely started to ring when an unexpected notification appeared on the screen at the exact same moment, one that made them pause with a look of complete amazement. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't something anyone could have predicted. It was the kind of unexpected sign that made them realize your story had been moving toward this exact moment all along. What they discovered in the very next heartbeat would reveal whether two people who had silently carried the same feelings could finally find the courage to speak them aloud.